week's list is on the Reformation. Remember, the Reformation was a religious movement from the early 1500s to the 1600s. It started with a man named Martin Luther. There were other reformers that came before and after him, so we'll be discussing some of them, and we'll be talking about the Catholic Church attempt to silence some of these voices. Martin Luther is the first person on the list. Martin Luther started what we now know as the Reformation. Luther was born in Germany in 1483. Back then it was called the Holy Roman Empire. But don't confuse Martin Luther with Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights activist of the United States. These are two different people. The Reformation is a period of time from the early 1500s to the 1600s when the church went through a period of division and changes. What marked the beginning of the Reformation was that Martin Luther nailed a document to the door of the Wittenburg Cathedral called the 95 Theses. This argued that the Bible and not the Pope was the ultimate source of authority, and there's a few other arguments on there against the Catholic Church. Martin Luther also argued that there were only two sacraments, Eucharist and baptism. But church officials were furious with Martin Luther. That's officials of the Catholic Church. They called a meeting called the Diet of Worms. This is a meeting of people and has nothing to do with eating worms. The city of Worms is in Germany, and it was a meeting of state officials. In the meeting, Martin Luther was forced to take back his teachings, but he refused to do so. So Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire accused him of being a heretic, and Martin Luther had to go into hiding. A second important person you need to know about the Reformation is John Huss, or Jan Hus. He came before Martin Luther, and he was a religious reformer, a Bohemian priest who lived from 1370 to 1415. He wanted to reform the Catholic Church, and he argued against the Church's wealth and the Pope's supreme power. He also argued that the Bible and the Mass should be read in the common tongue of the people of the local area. So in France it should be in French, in German lands it should be in German, etc. And not just in Latin, which was what the language that was used for the sermons back during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Unfortunately, John Hus was accused of being a heretic, and he was burned at the stake in 1415. If you ever visit Prague, go to the main square. There's a huge statue honoring this reformer. The third person on the list is Catherine of Siena. She was also an early reformer that came before Martin Luther. She lived from 1347 to 1380. Catherine of Siena had spiritual experiences and was extremely pious. That means she was devoted to her religion. She pleaded with Pope Gregory XI to return the papacy from Rome to the city of Avignon, which is in modern-day France. In Avignon, you have this building called the Papal Palace, and for a short time, the Pope lived in Avignon. In fact, at a certain time after the Great Schism, there was more than one Pope. Catherine wanted to end this Great Schism, and in 1461, she was declared a saint. The fourth term on the Pepes list for the week is the Protestant Church. Now, the Protestant Church is different from the Catholic Church. The Protestant Church was started by Martin Luther in what is now known as Germany. It's a different denomination. In fact, in the Protestant Church, you have three main denominations: Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Anglicanism. Many reformers after Luther continued to spread Protestantism. This was aided by the printing press that helped spread this information quickly. Other reformers include Huldrych Zwingli, John Calvin, and Henry VIII, and William Tyndale. Protestant churches were mostly in Northern Europe, while the Catholic Church was mostly in countries like what is now Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Greece, Russia, Bulgaria, and countries in Eastern Europe were mostly known as Greek or Eastern Orthodox. England, the Netherlands, and Northern Germany were mostly Protestant. The fifth person you should know about for the Reformation is King Henry VIII. Henry VIII was a famous monarch of England, and he was famous for being the father of Queen Elizabeth and for having 6 wives that he subsequently divorced or had executed. Henry formed the Anglican Church in 1534. This is also known as the Church of England. His reasons for breaking with the church were personal, mostly, because he wanted a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, who failed to reproduce a male heir. He then closed down the Catholic monasteries and took their riches. He wanted to have power over the church. He didn't want the Catholic Church meddling in England's affairs. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, was executed eventually for supposedly being unfaithful. And those are the top 5 for the Reformation. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know.